engine, we pump it up a bit so it can get about 650 horsepower. The gun is able to knock out pretty much anything in the early days on the battlefield, but we'll see how that changes. But there's a threat in the background. We know about the JS3, the Russian heavy tank. We found one in the ruins of Berlin. They've measured the armour. What's coming next is the question. What if they've got a bigger tank after the JS3? When Stalin dies in the early 50s, they rename them, they forget Stalin's name, they call them the T-10 tank instead. We know the Russians have built about 2,000 of those. What if they get an even bigger gun than the 122mm that they put on the JS3? What if there's going to be something bigger coming? So we start thinking, how can we increase our tank fleet, and what gun might be able to knock out the next generation of heavy Russian tanks? Unbeknownst to us, Khrushchev, who becomes president in the Soviet Union, he drops their heavy tank program. He doesn't like heavy tanks. We don't know that, so we start some experiments that leads to this monster, fv4005, with an enormous 183mm gun on it. We've come up with a new type of round. We call it high explosive squash head, HESH. And we like it because it means instead of just upping the amount of kinetic energy, instead of just upping the amount of welly behind the round that comes out the end of the barrel, with a HESH round, as long as you get it on the target, it'll do the damage. And it's basically a case full of plastic explosive. When it hits the target, it impacts and spreads out, and then it detonates a microsecond after impact. And that spread out piece of plastic explosive sends a shockwave through the enemy tank, and a massive scab flies off of metal on the inside. And if you get a big enough HESH round, it will pretty much send a shockwave through however thick the armour is of what we thought was going to be that next Soviet era tank. So they experiment with a 183mm gun. That's this fellow here. The first iteration they try, same barrel, but they try an auto assist system. In other words, it's not quite an auto loader, but the rounds, the projectile and the case that keeps the propellant in, so big that we need some help loading them in the barrel. Doesn't quite work as effectively. So we decide we're going to get two loaders, one to put the first part of the projectile in, followed by that big brass case, and they get the idea in the back of their head, hang on a second, what if this new heavy Soviet tank start coming on a bit sooner than later? Let's make a turret in case we're going to need that in a bit of a hurry. Hence, the second iteration we can see here of fv4005. This is what we might have had to build if the project had continued. They used the hull of a Centurion. It's not necessarily what it was going to go on. Mark III and Mark V Centurion hulls are used. It's just really to be able to take the thing around, see what it's like that way. And you can see there just the scale of that size of turret that's needed. Basically the turret stops small arms, not a lot else. But that space for the two loaders, the support there to hold that